Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking to our distinguished guest today about the inquiry, Chilcot inquiry into Iraq war, and also we'll be talking about the child abuse inquiry around Westminster. Yes, Alan. Iraq.
Well, you had asked me what explains the delay.
Yeah.
And I said we really don't know. And I said that the popular suspicion is that Blair is using massive influence to stop it. And I said to you, I suspect there is greater influence coming from the Americans. But when we broke for the commercial, I was on the point of saying that I think Blair is widely misunderstood in Britain. He was portrayed as Bush's poodle. I do not believe he was Bush's poodle. In my view, Tony Blair is a neocon. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was in league with Cheney, Vice President Dick Cheney, who was more the real president actually than Bush ever was. And I suspect the two of them convinced and conned Bush into going to war. That's my take on it. Now, if all these conversations that Blair had with Bush and Cheney were to come out, I think that's the story that could be revealed.
Yes, we were taken to war despite 1 million people marched on the streets of London.
Yeah, but you see, that's interesting. I've said to you earlier that we're either going to end up in 1984 or we need a people revolution.
1948.
1984, yeah.
Yeah, he wrote it 1948 and 1984 seemed to be so far away.
Yeah, but people say to me, I'm naive for thinking that people power demonstrations will change it. And they say, look, nearly 2 million people demonstrated to try and stop Blair going to war, didn't change a thing. And I say, you're missing something. In the time that has passed, some of Blair's cabinet colleagues have published their memoirs. And some of them said in it that this demonstration of 1.5 or 2 million people was causing the cabinet to wobble on the war decision. Now, had it have been 4 million, the cabinet actually would have more than wobbled. It would have said to Blair, you can't do it. You can't go to war. So at the end of the day, people power, people becoming engaged, is about numbers.
Yeah. But
you've got to make democracy work, is what I'm saying.
But it's not easy to mobilize this kind of gathering, 4 million or 5 million people on the streets, you see. It's a huge thing, isn't it?
And it also needs resources. It needs time, effort and resources.
How many people will have to be bussed from far-flung areas to come to London, you see? And the London will be chock-a-block anyway.
Yeah, well, the only chance of it happening is if the economic situation really deteriorates. Now, I personally think it will. There isn't going to be the money to pay the health service, to keep it going anything like it is, to keep schools going at anything like they are, to keep the roads going at anything like they are. I mean, we have the worst roads in the Western world, I'm told.
With millions of potholes. But they keep talking about that the economy is doing well. Even Mr. Obama has said that the economy is doing well. Well, if that is any indication of things. There is less of unemployment. There are more people employed now. So if everything is...
Yes, but how are they employed?
Yeah.
They're employed on these silly contracts where they don't know whether they're working 2 hours in a day or tomorrow or not. Zero, yeah. Absolutely stupid.
There's another inquiry. Don't you think this Chilcot report, if it is at all published, they said that it will be published after the elections, see. Is there something that in this report that is going to influence the voters?
I was asked that the other day. I can't see it. I can't see that Ed Miliband, the present Labour leader, would be blamed for what Blair did. So I can't quite make sense of that. Unless, as I said, if it's America that's actually been putting the pressure on to suppress a lot of the conversations that took place, if it came up before the election, that could lead to huge tensions between
more like
Britain
WikiLeaks. More like WikiLeaks.
Yeah. So I don't think that any Prime Minister would want that before an election.
What about this child abuse inquiry that's going on? and recently some big names, even some royals have been brought in. It has been suppressed since the days of Margaret Thatcher.
Look, the establishment is no different from the rest of us. It has its own queer, corrupt people. And since they had the power, is it surprising that they would want to cover it up? Of course it's not.
They'll keep covering it up.
Of course they will.
Alan, you have lived in the Middle East. You have covered Middle Eastern upheavals, turmoils. You were a close person to Yasser Arafat, and you wrote his biography. In your opinion, tell us something about Yasser Arafat, but also tell us how is the Palestine situation going to resolve, if at all?
Well, briefly, the statement I would make about Arafat, so far he's been the only man who was serious about peace. It took him 10 long years to persuade the Palestine National Council, the highest decision-making body, to approve his policy of politics and compromises with Israel, the two-state solution. He got that approved in 1979, more than a quarter of a century ago. So he prepared the ground on his side for peace on terms which any rational government and people in Israel would have accepted with relief. But they weren't interested. As to the future of the Palestinians, the question I now ask today, is Palestine a lost cause? And I truly believe it will be unless two things happen. I think the Palestinians have got to dissolve this impotent, corrupt Palestine Authority and hand back responsibility and accountability for occupation to Israel. Now that would impose fairly significant burdens of all sorts, security, economic, political, on Israel. And that, by definition, would make it easier to call and hold Israel to account for what it's doing. But that needs to be accompanied by something else. The Palestinian diaspora, Palestinian communities all around the world, they need to put their act together to become engaged and bring back this thing called the Palestine National Council. Now, in Arafat's day, it was the highest decision-making body.
True.
And people were elected to it from all over the world, wherever. It wasn't a perfect institution, but it was more democratic than not. Even Arafat was accountable to it. And that's why the Arab regimes were terrified of it.
Right.
They feared if there was a Palestinian state, it would be democratic. And that would be subversive, as far as they were concerned. So I've come to the conclusion, and I really mean it, that I think Palestine is a lost cause unless those two things happen.
Will they, one day, the diaspora, do they have the clout? Do they have the money?
Oh, they have the money. I mean, there are Palestinian billionaires just as there are Jewish Zionist billionaires. But they have a fear, because Islamophobia is so rampant and becoming more rampant by the day almost, there is a fear of becoming engaged and being, tarred as being terrorist, pro-terrorist.
Right.
Also, there's another problem. Some of the wealthiest Palestinians actually live in the Gulf states, and they are frightened of being seen to be directly engaged because they would upset the regimes in whose countries they live.
Right.
I mean, they should. I think future historians might well conclude, if the Palestinian diaspora does not put its act together to be able to speak to power with one voice, I think future historians might conclude that it betrayed the occupied and oppressed Palestinians every bit as much as the Arab regimes have done. The Palestinians today are on their own. They always have been. They have the support of an increasing number of ordinary citizens in the world. There is a rising tide of anti-Israelism. But that won't help unless the Palestinians do what I suggested.
One thing we do not know much about is what is the situation inside Israel? Do they all support the policies of the government?
Most Israelis have no idea, for example, there was the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 proposed by the Saudis, which is essentially the two-state solution. Also, there are indications that the Arabs would be very pragmatic on the right of return of the Palestinians. They would accept, as Arafat actually did, that the Palestinians would have to, the return would have to be limited to the, the mini-state. Recent polls in Israel have indicated that the vast majority of Israelis have no idea about this plan. Israelis, most of them, are absolutely brainwashed, and quite frankly, they are beyond reason.
Could you sum up the situation in Saudi Arabia? I know that you met King Faisal when he was alive.
And admired him greatly. I think he was the first and the last great Arab leader of modern times.
Yes, and he believed in democratic values. The situation right now is very vague. What is the question of succession in Saudi Arabia? See, the king is frail. The crown prince is also not well. They have named an assistant crown prince, which is quite unusual, Muqrin. And then they have another 10 sons of Ibn Saud still alive. So what is the situation going to be?
I don't know, but there's an issue that Saudi Arabia has got to make up its mind. If it's sensible, it will have serious discussions with Iran, and a rapprochement with Iran to dampen down everything. If it continues down the road of wanting to oppose Iran and fund all these killers.
Yeah, it is a question of leadership in the Middle East, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean, it's a matter of record. I honestly think that in their present president and foreign minister, Iran has two of the best leaders in the world. I think they're pragmatic. I think they're reasonable. And Javid, the foreign minister, wants to go to Saudi Arabia. They want to have a constructive dialogue with Saudi Arabia. So I'm sure there's a new leadership coming in Saudi Arabia very soon. Are they going to be realistic and pragmatic, or are they going to be as stupid as they've been for years past?
Alan, thank you very much for being with us and having traveled all the way.
My
It's
pleasure.
a pleasure having you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, viewers, for being with us. And we hope that you have enjoyed the show as much as we have. And we hope that when we meet again, it will be a better world. Democracy or otherwise, we'll have better living conditions and better hopes. See you next week, same time, same channel. Thank you very much.